Hello. In this video, we are going to learn how to multiply numbers, complex numbers, that are in trig form, and how to divide complex numbers that are in trig form. So in the last section, we've been learning how to put everything in trig form, which is 2 cosine 60 plus I sine 60. This is the same thing as writing 2 cis 60 degrees. And for cosine 150 degrees plus I sine 150 degrees. So this is the same thing as writing for cis 150. So if these two things are multiplied together, there's a certain way to go about doing that. So what you do, you multiply the radii together. So you're going to multiply 2 times 4. And you're going to add their degrees together. So you're going to add 60 and 150. So the resulting answer is 8 cis 210. And that would still be in trig form. Because we are also going to write our answer in rectangular form as well, you will need your unit circle so that you can look up the values for sine, cosine, tangent or sine and cosine really, of each of the angles on the unit circle. Okay, remember that rectangular form is a plus bi. And you would get that from multiplying this through. So 8 times cosine of 210 plus 8 times I sine of 210. And then we would write our answer like that. We're going to go ahead and do that in this problem. So for all of these, you're going to need r and you're going to need theta. And I like to kind of have a separation between finding r and theta and then doing the actual work later. So we have the two radiuses are our two radii, r3 and 2. So the radius we'll be using is 6. And the angles are 45 and 135. So the theta, let me go ahead and write this out here. The theta that we'll be using is 180. So we're going to be using r6 and theta, our angle, will be 180. So if you want to write it in shortcut form, it would be 6 cis 180. That's this one. If you're expanding that out, it would be cosine of 180 plus I sine of 180. And these are trig form. To go into rectangular form, we have to multiply this out. So we would take 6 times cosine of 180, and the cosine of 180 is -1, plus I sine of 180. So the sine of 180 is 0, so I times 0 is 0. Okay, so this is I, this is 0, so we have 0. So then if you distribute this, you just get -6 plus 0, so you get -6. Let me write it out. So you get -6 plus 0, which is 6. So this is rectangular form. It's a plus bi, and since the I, the complex portion of it, is 0, then it's just 6. And if we were graphing this and this was on an imaginary, on the x, you would have this point right here at 6, that vector. All right, pause the video, do classroom example 1, and then come back and check your answers on that. All right, so we need r and we need theta. So r comes from multiplying the two radii together. So 4 times 5. And then we're going to add 120 and 30. So that's going to give us 150 degrees. So they do want the result in rectangular form. So we're going to have 20. And I'm going to go ahead and write it out. Cosine of 150 plus I sine of 150. So that's going to be 20 times. The cosine of 150 is -radical 3/2 Sine of 150 is 1/2. So this is I times a half, I guess, if you want to look at it that way, or 1/2. I'm going to put 1/2 I. And then if you distribute and you multiply 20 times this, you basically get 20 times negative radical 3 over 2. So this becomes negative 10 radical 3, and then 20 times a half. And this is your answer in rectangular form. That's A plus BI. Okay, and again, in a picture, you can kind of work that out. For the next part, we're going to be doing division. And so for multiplication, we added we multiplied the radii, and we added their angles. So for division, we're going to divide the radii, and we're going to subtract the angles. And that should make sense. You're doing the opposite of what you're doing for multiplication for division. All right, so we're going to go ahead and write the results in trig form, which will make it easier because you could just write the radius cis the theta. So for the radius, we're going to just have those divided. So 10 divided by 5, just 2. And for the theta, we're subtracting. So here's where you have to be careful. You have to take the top number and subtract the bottom number. So theta is negative 210. So we have R and we have theta. So your final answer is just 2 cis negative 210 degrees. You don't have to put it in rectangular form, so you don't have to multiply that out. So then that's your final answer. If you were going to go into rectangular form, let me just go ahead and go over that. It would be 2 times cosine of negative 210. And negative 210 would be the same thing. Negative 210 is here, which is, if you add 360 to that, it's the same thing as positive 150 degrees, which would be this one. So if we were doing this, a cosine of 150 would be negative radical 3 over 2. We just did that in the last problem. And then this would be 1/2 I, again, just like the last problem where we had 150. And you would have just negative radical 3 plus I when you distributed this out. So this is trig form, and this is rectangular. So for example 2, again, pause the video and go ahead and do that part on your own. You might want to write it in trig form and rectangular form just for practice. All right, so R is equal to 27 over 9, which is 3. Theta is equal to 45 minus negative 180. So theta is equal to 225. So in trig form, this would be 3 cis 225. In rectangular form, it would be 3 times cosine of 225 and I sine of 225, which is also negative radical 2 over 2 with an I. So this would be negative 3 radical 2 over 2 minus 3I radical 2 over 2. Again, trig form, rectangular form. For the last 4 examples here, they're exactly the same thing as we did at the beginning. We have multiplication on the left and we have division on the right, but these values are not on the unit circle, and therefore we will be using a calculator to work these out. Okay, or you will be using a calculator to work these out. So for number 1, R is going to be 9.3 times 2.7. And don't round it if it doesn't need to be rounded. If there's only a couple numbers, just leave it. And theta is 125.2 plus 49.8. Again, we're adding the angles because it's multiplication. 175. And so your final answer in trig form will be 25.11 cis 175 degrees. And we don't have to put 0.0 because that's an exact answer. We didn't do any rounding. It came out exactly 175 degrees. For the next one, you can use, well, we're going to leave this in radians actually. So this is division. So R is 10.42 divided by 5.21, which is 2. And for theta, we are going to subtract. So we have 3 pi over 4 minus pi over 5. So if you wanted to use your calculator, you could just do 3/4 divided, or excuse me, 3/4 minus 1/5. Or we could just make the denominators the same. So if you make the denominators the same, that means for the first one, you're going to have to multiply top and bottom by 5 to make the denominators the same. So this is going to be 15 pi. And for the second one, you're going to have to multiply top and bottom by 4. So that's 4 pi. So your answer is 11 pi over 20. So these are your two values. So we have 2 for the radius and 11 pi over 20 for the angle. And that's in radians, so we don't put a degree sign. But yeah, if it's in radians, please go ahead and do your work in radians. In order to add and subtract in radians, you have to have the same denominator. Please try the last two, and then come back and unpause the video after you have tried those. For number 1, R is equal to 2.8 times 5.4, which is 15.12. For theta, we have 38.5 plus 74.5. So final answer is 115.12 cis 113 degrees. And when you're writing these, leave some space between the numbers and this middle portion so it makes it easier to read. Okay, space that out. Maybe a little bit even more so than you would be spacing out words in a sentence, like 2 spaces instead of 1. Okay, for the last one, R is equal to 11.37 over 3.79, which is 3. And when we're going to subtract, we have 5 pi over 6 minus pi over 4. I'm going to make the denominators 12. If you made the denominators 24, that's fine. You're just going to have to reduce yours. So here I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 2. That gives me 10 pi. Here I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 3. That's going to give me 3 pi. So that's 7 pi over 12. If you made the denominators 24, you would have 14 over 24, which we just have to reduce. Final answer, 3 cis 7 pi over 12. And that's it for section 8.3. I will be posting some odd questions for you guys to do in Google Classroom, so make sure you go ahead and check that out.